Today I'm working on a masculine and edgy single page layout using the Botanical Textures DSP from Stampin Up. And make sure you stay tuned until the end because I'll be announcing my brand new channel name. I've used this collection on a previous layout, so I have a few scraps left. While I still have plenty of this beautiful paper to create with for this layout, I'm focusing on using these leftover pieces. I'm using a sketch again, this one right here, designed by Jen Emock. This is part of my summer of sketches, and they've been a great way to stay creative and focused, especially during those busy summer months. This particular sketch features lots of layered shapes, some circles, one large rectangle, and 3 smaller overlapping rectangles. And I'll show you how I put my own spin on it with bold patterns and a fun embellishing technique. The photos I am documenting today are of my son Evan back in grade 4. It was 80s day at school and he loved dressing up. We went with more of that cool rock inspired look, you know, collared shirt, vest, and the red bandana tied around his leg. I even made him a boombox. It was just out of cardboard, out of a cardboard box and some construction paper. I'm starting with basic black cardstock as my base. These are the 2 pattern scraps I'm working with. The sketch shows a strip running down the page, not quite centered. One option could be to use this pattern paper on one side of the layout and place the narrow strip next to it. Layer the photos on top, and I'd call it done. That would absolutely work, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. But I think we can take it up a step further. In this sketch, the large rectangle looks about 4 by 6, but instead I'm going to give it a 5 by 7 mat like this and let that stand in for the large rectangle. I only have 2 photos for this layout. This one is 2.5 by 3 inches and the other is 3.25 by 5.5. To bring in some color, since Evan had that red bandana wrapped around his leg, I'm using real red cardstock as a frame. That's not in the sketch, but I've been kind of on a roll with that framed look lately, so why not? I trimmed the red cardstock to 11.5 by 11.5, and to bring in some white space, I grabbed some white Willow cardstock and cut it to 11 by 11. I really like how the white and the red play off each other and give me more flexibility with color. If you've been watching me for a while, you've probably noticed I tend to use small sized photos. I usually stick to a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch increments. So if the sketch calls for a 4 by 6, I'll often print mine to a 3 3/4 by a 5 and 5 3/4 or like a 5.5, depending on what fits best. To add in more red, I cut a narrow photo mat for my focal photo, about 1/8 of an inch reveal on that. Before I start placing everything, I'm going to trim down this pattern paper to 5 by 7. I'll use my rotary trimmer and cut it first to 5 inches, then 7. And I want the stripe pattern to run horizontally behind the photo. To add a bit of interest and give it a more edgy feel, I'm going to tear the edge of this 2 by 12 paper strip. To keep most of the width, I'm only tearing a small amount, pulling it towards me to reveal that white edge. I usually like cleaner lines on my layouts, but this paper just needs to be ripped. To pull in more color, there wasn't an obvious choice from the photos or paper collection. I decided to bring in Evan's favorite color back in grade 4, blue. I'm using blueberry bushel cardstock, and I just want a small strip tucked behind the torn edge. I gave myself a 1-inch strip to play with, although honestly, a 1/2 inch would have been plenty. But oh well, let's just tuck that under, and I like that. For the title, I'm using the party alphabet dies to spell the word boom. I just can't get enough of these die cuts. They are a bit of an investment, but totally worth it in my opinion. I'll cut the letters from smoky slate cardstock, then run them through my machine. And while I was at it, I also used the mini corrugated 3D embossing folder to give the letters some extra texture. Embossing cardstock adds so much depth to a layout, and it's not just for cards. This folder is quickly becoming one of my favorites, especially for masculine layouts. To help the title stand out, I cut the same letters again, this time from black cardstock, and I didn't emboss these ones. I'm layering them behind the gray letters to create a shadow effect. Just make sure you keep the shadow offset on the same side of each letter. It gives it a more consistent look. The full title will read Boombox, so I pulled out my mini alphabet dies to cut the word box. This set is super handy. It cuts all the letters in one pass. It would be helpful if I could get it back in. Forget it, it can stay like that. And it includes duplicates of the most used ones. I used blueberry bushel cardstock again, and now the second half of my title is ready. I'll figure out the best spot for these as the layout comes together. I'll just set them here for now. Now let's talk about those rectangle shapes on the sketch. One is my photo, of course, but instead of just placing 2 pieces of paper behind it, I decided to cut one into a tag shape. It makes the design feel more intentional and lets me bring in more pattern paper. It's funny how a small detail like that can really elevate the look. I'm also adding a black mat behind the little photo for contrast. The sketch includes 3 circles. I cut 2 from this camo looking pattern paper, 1 small and 1 large. And I'll tuck the smaller one down here under this photo cluster. And the large one is shown in the upper left of the layout, but I'm placing mine in the upper left corner of the photo instead. It still follows the sketch, but works better with my design. These are great spots now to build embellishment clusters. The final circle on the sketch got me thinking. I cut a plain black circle, but then I thought, why not make this look like a vinyl record? I added a smaller circle cut out of white cardstock to the center. Then I decided to take it one step further and add some grooves. I grabbed my nesting circle dies and some clear embossing powder. I've already prepped the cardstock by running my anti-static pouch over it. And I'm using Barely Art glue with the precision tip to trace around the dies and create ridged design. Here's a little quick tip while I'm using this glue. Always replace the pin in the glue tip when you're done. This glue dries fairly quickly and can clog. Not that it's happened to me, or maybe it did. Anyway, I'm placing one die at a time, tracing around it lightly with glue to make those record glue grooves. You don't need a lot, just a thin line. It's a bit tricky where my fingers are holding the circle, but by shifting my grip, I can keep it fairly neat. Fairly neat, anyway. I'm working quickly so the glue doesn't dry before I get the embossing powder on it. I remember listening to music on records. My sister had a Mickey Mouse record player, and I was so jealous of her. On the other hand, I did have a small stereo, not really a boombox since the speakers weren't connected, so it wasn't actually portable, but I could listen to the local radio station, I could play cassette tapes, and even record songs off the radio that I loved but couldn't, afford to buy the tape or didn't have the tape. Anyway, I'm sure I'm not alone with that one. Once I've traced all the circles down to the smallest size, I used a coffee filter to catch the leftover powder. I placed the circle on top of it and I'll pour a generous amount of embossing powder onto the record shape. Then I carefully remove the excess powder with a small paintbrush to get it ready for the magic to happen. I pour the extra powder back into the container and put the lid on to avoid any accidents. It's best to preheat the heat gun beforehand. I'm going to use a pair of tweezers to hold the cardstock so I don't burn my hands. I apply heat on the top and then shift to the bottom to help prevent the paper from curling. Hopefully you can get a good view of the powder melting, though since it's clear, it may be a little hard to see. I love how this has turned out. I hope the camera is picking it up because it really looks awesome in the light. And now I think this is the perfect spot to place the rest of my title. So how fun is that? I love it. In place of the final rectangle shown in the sketch, I'm auditioning this tag shape. I think it's going to be the perfect spot for my journaling. I'll cut it from the same smoky slate cardstock that I used from the title, so it ties in with everything nicely. Before I get too far, I'm going to ink the edges of all my paper layers with black ink. It's a simple detail, but it really helps define those layers and adds to that edgy vibe I'm going for. So these pictures were taken in 2018, right at the tail end of Evan's grade 4 year. He was always excited about special theme days at school, and 80s Day was no exception. We pulled pieces from both his closet and mine to put his outfit together. Honestly, I wish I still had that red bandana. And the night before the big day, we finished building the boombox. A homemade replica of the stereo system I always wanted when I was a kid. Evan loved our homemade masterpiece and was so excited to show up to school that morning carrying it on his shoulder like he stepped right out of an 80s classic movie. Looking at the layout now, there's a spot that feels a little bare. So I grabbed a stamp from Close to My Heart called Brush Strokes, and I'm going to use it to bring in a little bit more color. First, I'll mark off the area the photo is sitting so I know roughly where to stamp, along the side and the bottom. Then I'll move the photo and this circle out of the way. Using Blueberry Bushel ink, I'm stamping just a small swipe of the color in this area. I'm not concerned with it being perfect, just giving the area some simple, imperfect color. Just like that. To add more detail, I'm bringing in a few black splatters using the large stamp from the Elements of Text set. I'm rotating the stamp as I go and using a scrap piece of paper to mask off areas I don't want to hit with ink. That should be good. Let me just clean up a little bit and I'll bring the photo back in so we can look at it all together. Yep, that's exactly what it needed. Now for embellishments. I found this cassette tape shape in Cricut Design Space and I'll tuck it in behind the photo right about here. It cuts multiple pieces, so I glued them all together. I used all the colors from this layout. Next, I cut a small pair of aviator sunglasses. I'm placing them at the bottom of the photo, layered over that small circle. So from my stash, I pulled out this guitar sticker. If you've been around my channel for a while, you may recognize it. It was left over from a layout I created a while ago, and I'm still holding on to it. So I'm pretty excited to finally use it here. To bring in a bit more yellow, I'm adding a small date sticker Off camera, I typed up my journaling and printed it on Avery clear sticker paper and added it to the tag. I could have printed directly onto the tag, but this just felt easier at the time. I also cut a few chevron arrows from crushed curry cardstock to add them to the one tag. These will form a visual triangle with the other yellow elements, helping to draw the eye back towards the photo. I'm adding some classic matte dots. Sadly, these are discontinued, but I thought they were perfect for this layout. And I'm using only the black ones. They come in 2 separate sizes, and I'm placing them in groups of 3 around the page. I placed red twine from my stash in the tops of the tags, and next I stamped a few sentiments. One says "too cool" in red, and the other reads "looking good" in black ink. I stamped both onto white cardstock, and I tucked them in as little accent pieces. To balance out the splatters from earlier, I stamped a small splatter at the top and bottom of the right-hand side of the page. This is just a small detail to help things feel cohesive. Now I am so excited to finally share the winning name for my channel. And a huge thank you to everyone who took the time to vote, comment, and help me make this decision. So drum roll, please. My new channel name is Nicole's Scrapbook Stories. I absolutely love it, and I hope you do too. It feels like the perfect fit for my channel. It's creative, story focused, and still totally me. I'm truly grateful for this little community we've built here, and I couldn't have done this without you. You'll start seeing the new name pop up across my content as I work on updating my logo and branding. But don't worry, scrapbooking, storytelling, and creative project videos are still top priority and will continue to come out every Wednesday as usual. Let's take one more look at that sketch. I really enjoyed taking inspiration from the sketch and making it my own, especially swapping in a tag for journaling and creating a fun record detail to play into that 80s theme. While I didn't create 3 distinct embellishment clusters on this layout, I did form visual triangles using color, shapes, and layering. With so many different bold elements already on the page, I felt like I didn't need to add too much more. So here's a close-up of the finished layout. I'm loving how those alphabet dies turned out. Can you see all that texture on them? There's that cassette, the brushed stamping, and the splatters. And I'm not sure if the camera is picking this up, but those embossed rings on the record are catching the light just right. That finishes up today's layout. With all the bold shapes, textures, and pops of color, again, I kept those embellishments simple and intentional, just enough to support the story without overwhelming the design. And I'm so excited to have officially shared my channel name, Nicole's Scrapbook Stories. If you would like a closer look at the finished layout, I'll have still shots posted over on my Instagram. I did end up adding one more tag to fill in an awkward little spot on the page, and you'll be able to catch that in detail in the still shots. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and if you enjoyed this layout, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to share it with a fellow crafter. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments below, and here's a video YouTube thinks you might enjoy next. Let's keep telling our stories one page at a time. Until next time, happy crafting.